Hey, it's Ed. Real quick, I need to thank two of our brand new Patreon supporters, April Meeker and Jordan Stanton. Thank you so much for signing up to support the podcast on a monthly basis through Patreon. It really means a lot to me. As I've said a million times, it means a lot that people invest their time to listen to the podcast. And so the idea that people have decided to support it financially just really blows my mind. So thanks to you two, and thanks to everybody else who signed up, whether it's through Patreon or through one-time support. Obviously, podcast is free, will always be free, but if you're so inclined, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support to check out all the options. Thanks so much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Jessica Lewis. Jessica is a Montana-based metalsmith who's best known for the beautifully unique jewelry she creates for her online shop, Ruby and Revolver. She's also the mother of a 2-year-old daughter who she's raising with her husband in the home they constructed with their own hands located in Montana's Bitterroot Valley. Thanks to her tireless work ethic and disciplined creativity, Jessica has built an authentic and full life around the things she loves the most: her family, her craft, and Western landscapes. Montana's rugged mountains and valleys have been a part of Jessica's life for as long as she can remember, and even though she's traveled widely, she's always returned to Big Sky country. The Rocky Mountain landscapes inform many aspects of her work, as does her ethic of doing more with less. By American standards, she and her family embrace a purposefully minimalist lifestyle, which allows Jessica to focus on quality over quantity in both her professional and personal endeavors. In our world of constant connectivity and endless distraction, I'm truly inspired by Jessica's genuine and mindful approach towards living a simple yet rich and meaningful life. Jessica was kind enough to take a break from her numerous projects for this fun conversation about her life, creative process, and love of Montana. We chatted about how she got her start making jewelry and how the impending birth of her daughter inspired her to pursue art full-time. We talked about how she began making jewelry with the simplest of tools, and how the desire for fancy equipment can sometimes distract from the act of making art. We talk a lot about parenthood, and Jessica explains how becoming a mother shifted her perspectives on work and life. We talk about our shared appreciation for Stoic philosophy, and how several specific books have impacted Jessica's creativity. We talk about the importance of international travel and wisdom gained from spending time abroad. And as usual, we discuss favorite books about the West, the best advice she's ever received, and several of her funny and unexpected hobbies. I really love this conversation, and I know you will too. Thanks again to Jessica for taking the time to talk. So when you meet somebody, never met them, and they ask you, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
You know, for the first time in my life, it's not like a 5-minute long response. Well, a little of this and a little of that. I think I kind of just sum it up right now with, I'm a metalsmith. If I'm honest, I feel like a mother. You know, I feel like those are the two things right now in my life that kind of take precedence, and the two things that really I divide my time between. Also, you know, there's a number of other things that call for my attention, but those are the two things that I think, you know, really sum it up for me right now, is being a mom and being a metalsmith. Yeah.
Well, I want to learn a lot about your metalsmith work, and then selfishly, I want to get parenting advice from you. So we're gonna talk about those. Maybe the first thing we can talk about is your jewelry, because I love it and I think it's so unique. And, when you scroll through different social media, it seems that there are a lot of people doing that kind of work, but something about yours caught my eye, and just, your creative process and the life you're living up there in Montana. So maybe could you just describe your jewelry first of all, and then we can dig into how you make it?
Well, first of all, thank you. I think the thing maybe I struggle with the most is making sure I have like a unique voice in a world that's pretty saturated, with,
Yep.
There's a lot of jewelers I admire and a lot of folks out there doing really beautiful work. And so it's one of the things you kind of struggle with as an artist is how do you make your work unique? So thank you for saying that. I think maybe one of the things that sets my work apart, if you could say that, is I allow it to be a little bit raw, and I tend to sort of like things that are a little bit less refined and maybe just have a little bit of character. Other people might see it as flaws, but I think there can be a difference there. For me, I know when it's an error in my craft, and I know it when it's like just a part of the metal. I use a lot of actually primarily now I use reclaimed metal, and it kind of dictates the work I do. Sometimes I melt it down, but oftentimes I use it as sort of just a way to kind of, I don't know, it gets a little woo, but letting the metal speak to me as far as what can be made with it. This is this really rough piece of metal. It's not going to work for everything. It's not going to turn into a diamond engagement ring. It's going to have some texture, and it's going to have some grit to it. And it's just not going to work for a million different pieces of jewelry. It's going to work for a specific kind. And so I kind of let that guide me a little bit. And so I often don't have like mass quantities. I have really one of a kind pieces, and they don't often lend themselves to being mass produced, or really ever. It's kind of like, this is the one piece that came from that, and it is what it is,
Yeah, definitely. And so you've been doing this for quite a while now. Did it take you a while to get to the point where you were proud of the, quote, imperfections in the work? I mean, it's obviously that is the product, that's the end goal. But was there ever a point where you were trying to get it perfect, and then you realized that's just kind of a waste of time, and it takes the character out of it in the end?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, it's easy to get into a comparison game.
Yep.
You look at other people, super flawless, like high finished stuff, but it's also not necessarily, while I appreciate it, and I think like a lot of those people are masters of their craft, it's not necessarily what I want to wear. And so I had to sort of come to terms with that and realize like what I'm drawn to and what speaks to me. And it's definitely stuff that has a little bit of a rugged edge to it. And I still struggle with that. I mean, there's still times where I'm like, oh, maybe I should, step it up and do better and have it, I question it. But for the most part, I find myself pretty consistently coming back to being okay with that kind of style and being that being my voice, because that's what I'm drawn to.
Yeah, it seems like that's kind of a common theme across any kind of art. Is it takes a long time, or not a long time, but a lot of experience, whether that's a year or a decade of just going through, making mistakes, and then finding your voice, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So you mentioned reclaimed metal. Can you talk a little bit about that, and like what's an example of some reclaimed metal that you use?
Well, it comes from all over. I'll buy up old pieces from like an estate sale, or hit up pawn shops and find, I just found a batch of like absolute beautiful sterling spoons.
Cool.
Yeah, at a pawn shop, and so I kind of scour all over the place and look for wherever I go, wherever I travel. I'm just constantly on the lookout for just kind of the odd sale. And then I also rely on my dad somewhat too. Mm-hmm. He's a resource because he's in metalwork. He oftentimes has access to folks that are getting rid of, big quantities of reclaimed metal that I can access, which has actually been in recent years, as I've grown, been pretty nice just because you can't always keep a steady, a steady supply in just buzzing to the random pawn shop and whatnot. So I supplement from, a bunch of different places, and there are actually some vendors now, and it's becoming more popular. So there are places that you can go and you can actually buy certified reclaimed metal, which has been helpful too. And I supplement there sometimes as well. That's
cool. It's kind of like a treasure hunt, finding that stuff, and you never know. That's really neat. So how did you get into this? Like, when did you initially start? Because, there's obviously a lot of kind of standard artistic practices, painting, photography, but,
right.
Metalwork is very unique. So what piqued your interest in it initially?
I was always drawn to, I've always liked art in general. I've always tinkered, whether it was pottery or, painting or drawing or whatever. I've always been drawn to it. But for whatever reason, the metal medium is what really stuck with me. And I just started by reading books and messing around and essentially, again, hitting up the old pawn shops and getting just old machinery, old tools. And I just started just messing around. And that's been, that's been almost 15 years ago.
Wow.
That I started accumulating. Yeah. And it was just a process of trial and error, honestly. It was really making bad mistakes and making really ugly stuff for a really long time and just learning from it and just trying again. It was just keeping at it, I suppose.
And could you talk a little bit about when you started, the tools you used? Because I've had conversations with different artists on this podcast, and we've talked about this this kind of idea that upcoming or new artists have, thinking, well, I need a lot of fancy gear, like especially in photography or something like that. I need a fancy camera before I can do it. But time and again, there have been artists on here that started with the most basic equipment you can get. And I read somewhere that you followed a similar strategy when you started out. Can you discuss that?
I feel like that's in life and anything. It's like you make what you have work, whether it's gear to go outdoors or whether it's, gear in the studio, you sort of, if you really want to do it, you kind of make it happen. And I had everything I've had, and I still use a lot of this to this day, but I use, I went to pawn shops and got old anvils, old hammers. None of this was jewelry specific. None of this was high end. I actually randomly ended up purchasing on accident, unbeknownst to me, some of my dad's old.
Oh, really?
Out of his, he had some anvils that he had made out of stainless steel. And
cool.
I ended up buying them randomly, and we figured it out later. But so just hammers, tools, metal snips, saws, nothing I had until I would say even in the last 5 years was even really jewelry specific, besides my torch. That's one thing that I feel like I really, you kind of had to put a little research in, and you wanted to make sure you had something that wasn't too big to burn tiny little fittings and finishings and whatnot. So that was the one thing that I, spent some money on, and that was jeweler specific, but everything else was really, and a lot of it still is pretty, old school, even some tools of blacksmiths of the past,
That's so cool. And I completely agree that you just need to do the work. Like we were talking a little bit before we started recording about this podcast. And I mean, when I started this podcast, I went to Best Buy and bought the cheapest microphone they had, plugged it into my computer, and then go. And I screwed up a million times, and there are times when it sounds bad, but you don't even know what equipment you need until you're deep in it. And I think that's very great advice for anybody in any artistic endeavor. You and the rest of my guests know a lot better than I do, but I think that's so important. So what's your studio like? What's the physical space where you work, and how important is that space to your creative process?
Well, it's a real improvement from the kitchen that I was working.
Once again, you just got started, you know?
A step up from having metal in your cereal. But the first time in my life I've actually had a real functioning studio, and I feel really lucky to have it because I got to design it, and it's not fancy, but I did, put some time into some hardwood shelving and some really solid wood for, so that I can hammer on, that's really sturdy, that can take a beating. And so on each side of the room, there's sort of shelving and benches that I built, and they all just make sense for the kind of the flow of the shop, which is, it's really nice. And it actually does make a difference as far as efficiency goes, and just, places for things. It's nice to have a place for your hammers and your saws, and, just everything has its place. Not that I'm the best at keeping it super orderly all the time, but it's nice to have that, and to have, it's toxic. And so it's nice to have, I have commercial venting in there now, which is a huge step up. Mm-hmm. And also having a lot of natural light, which I just, as a human, really value.
Yes.
I love a lot of natural light, and I have a nice view, and it's actually my favorite room in the house, honestly. I really love it. Yeah.
I would imagine, especially now with the kiddo, that having your own space is even more important for the safety aspect, but also just being able to get away and have you're a designated space. At least that's the experience I've had with two crazy little girls.
Sometimes it's actually part of the motivation for having a little bit of a portable studio, because even having it here, and I function well on having chunks of time, and it's hard to find with a little 2-year-old running around, and so sometimes I wish it was detached. But, yeah, as of now, I'm still just thankful to have a space to work in,
And so correct me, I read a lot of stuff online about you, and it very well could be wrong, so don't hesitate to correct me if I get this wrong. But I read that you had worked in several different jobs and careers before you decided to dive into this full time. And so what was the point when you decided, all right, I can make a living doing this full time, and you made the leap to do that?
Well, I've been working in social work for many, many years. And I think that really, I was working with victims of violent crime, and that sort of had a shelf life for me as far as sort of just my mental health, to be honest with you. It's just it was a very sort of heavy job, and I really value work that helps. I do. I really value it. But at some point I felt like I was becoming a little toxic and sort of viewing the world in a darker way, seeing maybe a cute family and kind of wondering what was really going on. It just, when violent crime is your life day in and day out, it just sort of, it colors the way you see the world, Mm-hmm. And so I had actually gone into a different helping career, gone back to school, and I was doing respiratory therapy, and I became pregnant, and it was sort of this really odd time to quit. I had tried to quit a few times before, but it's this weird clarity that comes with being pregnant and sort of the legacy you want to leave and the life you want to, show your child. And it was like, I wanted to know that I gave it my all. I didn't have a huge safety net, or really much of a safety net at all. And so that kind of always held me back. But I decided that it was kind of now or never. It was either, give it my all, or sort of just resign myself to just, doing the work I was doing. And I decided to give it my all. I also didn't want to have my daughter for me, I just didn't want to have her in daycare every single day. I wanted to be really actively involved. And so I was, 3 months pregnant, I think. And I just quit.
That's awesome.
And gave it a go. Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to dig into that a little more if possible. Not that I'm like a psychologist or anything, but I think a lot of people have that, a lot of people have kids, and a lot of people have this idea of this dream they want to pursue, but for one reason or another, they don't have the guts to do it. Yeah. And so, I mean, where do you think that came from? What do you think is different about you that gave you the guts to say, all right, this is super important to me, and it's super important that I set an example that I can be proud of to my daughter, and you actually did it versus just thinking it and then saying, oh, but I got bills to pay and I'll just do this for a little bit longer and I'll reconsider later. I mean, where does that braveness come from?
I wish I could say that I'm just brave, but I don't think that's necessarily it. I think I'm one part live in the moment, like go big or go home, and one part, you've got to be responsible. I grew up pretty poor, and so that's definitely a part of like I wanted to be able to give Indy maybe more than I had, and I think every parent probably wants that on some level. And so I don't really know what made the difference. I think there is something inside of me that maybe when I'm feeling really fearful of something, there's something in me, and I can't really identify it, to be honest with you, but it makes me not want to sort of give into it and makes me kind of want to jump. I think, maybe part of that is that I saw my dad do that, even though he comes from absolutely nothing. And he made a go at living his life creatively. And I think that's definitely an inspiration. And just knowing that I didn't want to live not knowing that I'd tried. I can say that for me, for some reason, that was just very daunting to me to know that I hadn't given it my all.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I had a similar experience when my first daughter was being born. It was like, 4 years ago now when my wife was pregnant. But that was, and I don't know that it was like a conscious thing, but looking back, I feel like a lot of different things kind of shifted and a lot of different things aligned. And I think my tolerance for lack of a better word, bullshit, kind of disappeared and, or at least reduced a whole lot. And I had it's interesting how that happens. And I'm not brave at all, but I think the idea of wanting to be an example and understanding the role of being an example to this little human that's going to be looking up to you is if you got a certain kind of personality, it's pretty damn heavy. In a good way, though,
Absolutely. Yeah. Coming from someone, I wasn't really on the kid train. I wasn't planning on having kids. It wasn't really in my trajectory. And I was shocked at how profoundly I really feel like it sort of just changed me without even, I don't know, just making that conscious choice. There is something that sort of shifts inside you, in a million different ways. But yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, all these cliches you hear about being a parent, I've learned they're cliches for a reason.
Totally.
And when I say them, I'm like, oh man, I say them to people who don't have kids. I'm like, I'm sorry I'm saying this, but it's true. I promise it's true.
I've caught my saying that. It's cliche, I know, but it is true. Yeah.
So thinking about just the creative mentors, you mentioned your dad. Is there anybody else that comes to mind, or other people, you don't have to know, you can know them or not, people you've read about that have influenced your life as a creative?
There's actually one guy in particular. His name is Matt Ike. He makes these beautiful steel resonator guitars. They're absolute, it's like next level work, in my opinion, as far as the way he runs his business, the way he makes his guitars, the sound that he creates from them. And he's a huge mentor. I've actually never met him. And he's one of those people, again, that I connected to from social media, but he's who I would consider, kind of in the big leagues as far as his skill level and just his expertise. And I don't even know how we ended up connecting through someone, one of those kind of deals, but he sort of took me under his wing a little bit when I was kind of just starting, and took the time to write me this letter about sort of, finding your own voice in your work. And just, I was just amazed that someone took the time, and still to this day can be someone that if I have a question about a new torch or a new method, or even random business stuff, which is not my strong suit, he's very good at it. And he's been able to sort of help me and direct me and inspire me hugely. And, we're in very different but sort of similar fields. And it's the name is Mule Resonator Guitars, and he's made guitars for all these really prolific artists, and it's just inspiring to me. I think he's like a daily source of inspiration. But there are so many people that I could go on about in jewelry, in life, in environmental issues that inspire me daily. But he's definitely probably the first one that comes to mind.
Cool. I'll put a link to his social media and site or whatever on the webpage so people can look that up. And then, continuing on that theme, are there any books about creativity or the creative process that have been important to you that you would recommend?
No, not necessarily on the creative process. I've read a million books on jewelry making, on, real tedious sort of technique. I actually find the book that I kind of has been useful for me now is actually The Obstacle is the Way.
Oh, I love that book.
Isn't that a great book?
I love it. I sent it to somebody recently because I just think it is such a powerful book. I love that thing.
Oh, good. Yeah, I do too. And I find that it's one of the books that I actually return to, like, pretty regularly, just when I'm in a creative slump, or when I'm spending time building this house versus working in the studio, or, whenever. I just find it, I'm really drawn to Stoicism, and that book particularly, just kind of these bite-sized chunks of things that you can take into your daily life. I've actually found that to be really useful for me recently.
Me too. I think that was such a surprising book. I got it on Kindle because it was like on sale for 99 cents or something, and it was so good. I ended up having to buy the paper copy because I can't recommend it enough to people. And just in general, Stoicism, it opened my mind to that. And there's so many parallels between Stoicism and then like Buddhism, and just this idea of not letting your emotions just run wild like a crazy horse like mine does all day long.
It's just like a constant reminder for me when I'm in like a shit mood, or when I'm having a pity party or whatever it is. It always it kind of pulls me out of a funk a little bit. And I just feel like there's a lot of little gems of knowledge in that book. So yeah, I think that for me, it actually translates pretty well with creativity,
Definitely. And people who listen to this podcast, a lot are probably sick of hearing me say this, but have you ever read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield?
I haven't. And I've actually heard you mention it and been meaning to pick that up. And I haven't gotten around to it.
It's so good. And it pairs well with Obstacle is the Way, and just this idea of what he calls the resistance and this fear of putting yourself out there. And that's what I was thinking about a second ago when you were saying that when you are fearful of something, you have this tendency to want to go towards it. And that's kind of what that whole book is about, which is pretty interesting.
I actually have read a little bit, just a few snippets, because you've kind of piqued my interest on it, but about resistance and about sort of just the act of making yourself do it, even if it's feeling like maybe it's not there, or maybe you don't have it, or maybe you're not creatively feeling super creative.
Yep.
And I mean, that makes sense to me. And especially when you're doing your art as your business, you sort of have to do that.
Yeah.
On some level.
Oh, definitely. There's some quote by, I can't remember who said it, but he said, somebody asked him, does he wait for inspiration to strike? And he says, yes, I do. But luckily it strikes every single morning at 8 a.m. when I sit down at my desk to start writing. Do you have any, speaking of that, do you have a certain daily routine? I imagine it's mixed up a bit with the introduction of the kiddo, but is there a certain, I don't know, procedure sounds surgical, but are there certain steps you take every morning to to get the creative juices going, or is it, what does your process look like?
I do. I mean, I think for me, it has changed, and it continues to change even as Indy gets a little older. Every morning we used to go on a hike every morning, whether it was behind the ridge or behind the house on the ridge, excuse me. But, and now she wants to cruise on her own and she wants to do her own thing. And so it's always evolving. For me, I don't necessarily get to schedule my days as much as I'd like to, but I think for me, having sweating every day, moving every day, getting some fresh air every day is probably the thing that I make sure to build into my day. And I don't necessarily get to choose necessarily when that is all the time. But for me, if I can, I try to make that in the morning and maybe a little break in the afternoon if I can. And sort of just coffee, sweating, and if I'm lucky, getting to write down a few thoughts. That's something that goes by the wayside a little bit for me right now, is being able to journal regularly. But I think those things for me really help with the creative process. Man, if I don't get a good sweat in, I kind of get a little stagnant.
Oh yeah, same. Not stagnant for me, but kind of crazy. And then my wife is like, go outside and swing that kettlebell around until you about throw up. And then I do, and then everybody's in a better mood.
That's so true. Yeah, I know. And it, some days for me, some days I get to run up the ridge behind the house, and some days I answer emails on my exercise bike, and it's just motherhood right now. And I just take what I can get, and I'm thankful for getting to sweat for 45 minutes or whatever it is, but making sure that that's a part of my day is key for sure.
Definitely. So you've mentioned a few times the ridge behind your house. So I want to talk about Montana and where you're located. So exactly where are you right now? Well, where's your house?
I'm in the Bitterroot Valley. So all the massive fires 2 years ago.
Yep.
Those were right behind my house. That's where we're located.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're right there. Yeah, a large portion of our property actually got a little damage from that. We had a good morale year last year.
Wow.
But yeah, so that's right where we're at. We're in the Florence area. That would be the closest kind of non-town that we're in, the vicinity of.
I love that area. That valley too. is just unbelievable. It's just hard to understand how pretty it is until you spent time there.
Yeah, it really. I feel really lucky to be so close to it and have access to it on the regular for sure.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Montana, actually. I was not born in Montana. My family's from Montana, but my dad, he used to work for NASCAR back in the day. And,
really?
Yeah.
In North Carolina?
No, in California.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we were based in California, but he was gone every week, of course. We were based out of California, and he traveled. He was just a pit boss. So he just did the work on the cars.
That's cool. Yeah.
It was, I think he really loved it. But with a family and whatnot, it became kind of tiresome, I think, for my mom and the time away and whatnot. And so when I was 6, they moved back to Montana. And I've left numerous times, but I've always come back. So it's definitely home.
And so looking back at your childhood there and just kind of growing up in that area, are there any experiences you can think of, whether artistic or, time outside, adventures that, like very specific experiences that kind of shaped your outlook and your love for that landscape in the West?
Yeah, as far as, specific experiences, I have kind of these glimpses or these memories of, maybe being at my dad's hunting camp or camping with the family, or back in the day, my dad used to paddle a bit. And so he'd take us on the river. And, those are the things that those are the happy memories from my childhood that I think connected me to Montana and connected me to the sports that I'm into now, or the activities that I'm drawn to. Specific memories, not so much, more of just kind of the feeling of Montana and the access to public lands.
Yep.
And, just kind of, yeah.
It's funny because I asked that question because, I grew up in North Carolina, and I have like very, very specific trips of when I came west, 3 or 4 trips that I think of. But then when I talk to people like you or people that grew up in that landscape, the answer is more, it's just kind of that it blended together and was just part of your life. So, I think that's cool to compare and contrast that.
It is interesting.
And so I read that you went to college at University of Montana and then decided to take off and do some traveling. Is that right?
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
Gosh, all over the place. We went to Southeast Asia was our destination, but we went to Nepal and Laos and Thailand and Vietnam and India for a bit. And we spent about a year doing a little work in Vietnam. And
what kind of work?
Working at a women's clinic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was sort of in the height of the Maoist insurgency there. And the Red Cross had sort of pulled out at that point in time. And they were it sounds very dramatic, but it didn't feel that way being there. But there was a lot of need for sort of volunteer help in these really sort of rural clinics. And they have one of the highest maternal mortality rates, and so we spent some time volunteering there and then honestly just traveling and seeing the sights and buzzing around,
So what were the big lessons learned from that trip? Because I had never really traveled internationally. I'd been on like a climbing trip in South America, but it was the mountain. So, it could have been Colorado really. And then my wife and I moved to Central America, for a year. And that was when I was 30, or no, I was 31. It was such a unbelievable, change in perspective and just a formative life experience at that age. And so, yours was when you were in, college age. So how did that affect your outlook?
Oh gosh, I think, if you can do it, I feel like everyone should, because it is pretty profound. It's, especially living in rural Montana, it's a real paradigm shift to go somewhere where you don't speak the language, you're not familiar, with the culture beyond, the few books you read. And to sort of just be out of your comfort zone and seeing a completely different way of life. And I think, learning to roll with the punches, learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and sort of just having this appreciation for how different cultures can be. But there's also these sort of common threads of humanity that kind of surpass language and culture and can kind of bind you. It's surprising the people you connect with when you're abroad. And I think that's I think that's like an invaluable lesson,
I completely know, and I completely agree. And I think being able to look at the United States from the outside looking in instead of being in the middle of it, I think that's that was very valuable to me. And then one of the lessons I learned, which ties into my next question for you, was the importance of living simply and how you don't need all this stuff constantly that's just overtaking, that can overtake your life. And I read somewhere, that you are, very focused on the idea of doing more with less. And can you talk about that, just the idea of living simply and why that's important to you and your family?
I think it's a loaded question, and meaning that there's a lot of different layers to it. I think, when you travel, you see, in America, there's a lot of, obviously there's a lot of different socioeconomic strata and whatnot, but there's also a lot of excess. A lot of the American dream is, this suburban house and this picket fence and this really nice car, and that's success,
Yep.
And I find that, I'm not really interested in that at all. And I think that we can get really tied up in wanting more and, equating that with happiness. And a lot of the stuff, that we acquire, it needs maintenance, and it requires payments, and you have to work more to have it, and or you have to hire someone to maintain it. And I think you can just kind of get caught up in this spider web of tying yourself down and sort of limiting yourself. And I think it's kind of a cultural phenomenon. And when you travel, you see, first of all, a lot of folks that have it a lot worse than you do.
Yep.
But also a lot of folks that have a lot less and live really beautifully and
yes.
are very tied to their communities and are very, in tune with things that maybe we've kind of lost in the shuffle of the rat race, and I think that's pretty eye-opening. And I really just don't think having more equals any sort of happiness. I think there's a level of being able to pay your bills and being able to, feed yourself and whatnot that, of course, we all need. But the sort of, you need this to be happy, I don't really buy into it.
Have you always been like that, or was your travels or other experiences, did that shape that idea?
I think more and more, the older I get, the more I become that way.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I've always been that way. I think that there was a period when I was younger that I probably bought into it more than I do now,
Yeah.
And I remember being really embarrassed by my really shitty lemon of a car at high school, having like the ugliest, dumpiest car. I remember being embarrassed, or my dad's really crummy pickup. I remember hiding in the front seat and him honking the horn, So I think, if I'm honest with myself, no, I haven't always been that way. I just, the older I get, the more obvious it becomes to me, I think. Yeah.
Here's a funny quick story. But so my wife and I got married and we got all of our wedding gifts, and we're from North Carolina where they just go insane with the wedding gifts, and people that aren't invited to the wedding are giving you gifts, and it's just crazy. So we opened them, wrote thank you notes, boxed them up, put them in storage, and then we left for Central America. And so then we got back and moved into and so in Costa Rica we had like 3 glasses, 3 forks, 3 plates, and it was awesome. And then we get back and we start, first of all, it looks like a crate and barrel truck, like wrecked in our house with all these boxes. And we opened up all the boxes and I put the stuff in the cabinets and I counted, and we had 135 glasses.
Stars. Wow.
And I was like, what the hell is going on? This is unbelievable. And, it was gifts given with love and people trying to be nice. But I mean, and I always wonder, like, if I had to live in Central America, would I have thought that 135 glasses was completely normal? And I'm scared to think I might have. And that's crazy. And that's just kind of standard American stuff,
Exactly. It's kind of just the cultural norm. Yeah.
Well, I'm not trying to act like I got it all figured out now, because I'm far from that. But at least in that little victory, I know I don't need 135 glasses.
Isn't it funny, though, how easily you can accumulate? I mean, it happens. I can say that I really value this, but even being pretty mindful, it's still easy to accumulate. It really is.
It's crazy. And I'm really making an effort with my girls to avoid the idea, them getting that idea in their head that you need more. And so that brings me to parenthood. And we touched on this a minute ago, but being a mom, I mean, has it just been a massive shift in thinking for you, or how has it affected just kind of your overall life? I know that's a huge question. You could probably write a book about it, but just what comes to mind when you think about changes that have occurred from being a mom?
Well, I mean, I work a lot less, but I'm a lot busier.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think that's, the first thing that, I mean, gosh, I thought, I I didn't really read any parenting books. I didn't really go down that rabbit hole. And I just kind of was like, well, I'm going to have this child, and this child's just going to go with me where I go, and it's just going to do what I do, and it's going to be great, And, I realized I was like a way better parent before I had a child. I had it all figured out. And it's just really interesting when you get these little people who are really their own little personalities and their own little beings. And you really, I want the experiences that we have outdoors and in life. I want them to be valuable for her and fun for her as well as for me. I don't want to turn her against any of, drag her along and have it be miserable and have her hate backpacking or something like that. So, there's just a lot more give and take now. And there's a lot more, again, with the cliches, but you're not living just for yourself. You've really got this other human that you sort of create your life around, And so while we do still do a lot of stuff in the outdoors, it takes on a little bit, it looks different now, it just does. And she also just, all the cliche things she makes me want to be a better person, she makes me want to make the world a better place. And while I felt that before, I feel a real urgency for it now. Like, I really need to leave this place better for her, so she gets the same experiences that I've had, and she gets the same opportunities and whatnot.
So knowing what you know now about being a parent, and is she two and a half? Is that right?
Two. She actually just turned 2. Yeah.
So she's just between. So I've got a 3.5 and a 1-year-old. So she's.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's wild,
That's
but
full on.
Yeah, it's fun. But knowing what you know now, 2 years in, like if your best friend asks you for advice on just some words of wisdom for parenthood, what comes to mind for that?
Again, I'm gonna throw out another cliche here, but I think that you really have to go with your gut. You have to really, they're all different. All kids are different. All lives are different. All parents are different, and you sort of have to just really go from your gut and trust yourself and parent in the way that makes sense for you and your family. I do it differently than a lot of my friends do, and that's okay. But I just do what makes sense for us, what makes sense for her, and try to do it in the most authentic way I can. And that's sort of just, trusting myself, which it works about 75% of the time. But
that's better than mine's probably like 40-41%. Well, that's great. I agree. And it goes back to kind of what we were talking about with the American dream, this idea of accumulating. And if you just kind of go with the flow of typical society, at least from our conversation now, I bet it would not work out the way you would want, because I've seen that with my little girls. And if I just did it the standard American way, the results would not be what I want. And so I think it's not being afraid to go against the grain a little bit and not go against the grain for the sake of going against the grain, but follow your gut. And if your gut says,
absolutely,
I don't want my kids staring at an iPad 3 hours a day, don't let them stare at an iPad 3 hours a day.
That one's a tough one, man. Yeah.
It's very tough. And so in the midst of all your work and your motherhood and everything you have going on, it sounds like you've got a few construction projects going on as well. So what's going on there?
Oh, timing's just beautiful, let me tell you. We started building before I was pregnant. And we built, we'd both worked construction, so it made sense for us to build our own home. And financially, honestly, it made sense for us to build our own home. And we found a little plot of land, and we just decided to build a tiny little bungalow that was basically a studio for me, and then a small living space above. And right now, currently, we don't have a room for our daughter. It's just an open space, essentially, with a studio in it. And so at some point that becomes like pretty challenging. And I also have some like my grandmother who's getting up there in age is going to need some additional help and whatnot. And so we kind of took all of those things into consideration, and we thought, okay, at some point we're going to have a room for our child, right? Like
yeah.
At some point, like that's going to be a reality. And so we decided that we were going to build again, and then have this small space be a space that we can have the family here that will need to be here. And we'll be close and we'll be able to take care of them and whatnot. And so we started building again when, gosh, that was last summer, but we were evacuated for most of the summer. So we really didn't get to build. And so we are currently in the process of building basically the same place, but with a room in it for our daughter. So that's where we're at right now with that project. And it's just my husband and I. We haven't outsourced any work. And so it's a long process. It's taking a lot longer than it did when she was just in my belly. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that's super cool. I mean, obviously it's extremely challenging, but man, what a sense of accomplishment to when it's all said and done, you know? I mean, and it's your place that you build. I mean, how many people can say they did that, you know? I mean, I had some new bookshelves put in the other day or a while back, and I didn't even do that myself. You know, we're building a house.
You know, I am proud of it, but I'm also, I daydream about outsourcing it all. Occasionally. Just someone else finish it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But we were really committed to using, you know, you have to log some of the land. And so we were able to use a lot of what we logged in the actual beamwork of the house and stuff, which is really cool. And I really, you know, you see there's a lot of waste in construction. And so we were able to have a little bit more say and really, you know, use stuff that we could stand behind and build it the way we wanted to build it. And so that part I like, but I definitely am over it. I'm ready to be done, you know?
So in the midst of everything you have going on, you know, it sounds like there's very little slack in the system. And one thing I've admired about you from a distance and then in our communication is your seemingly very healthy relationship with electronics and social media. And it seems like you're able to use it for a tool, and you're able to use it to, you know, for your business and to, you know, build relationships with people, but it's not at all like it's taken over. And so can you discuss your relationship with, I guess, technology, specifically social media, and how you manage to keep it in check so it doesn't seep into all the other more important parts of your life?
You know, I think it's a slippery slope for a lot of us. And I certainly don't have it all figured out by any means, but I try to recognize the value in it. And I look at, like, if I was doing this business, you know, 20 years ago, I would be paying for advertising. Yep. I would be, you know, really having to really put money that I don't have into advertising and trying to get my name out there, and instead being able to sort of organically, you know, for free, post my work and reach a global audience is pretty huge. And, you know, be able to connect with people like you, be able to connect with, I've actually gained a lot of like really good friends from it. So there's a lot of positives. I think there's a lot of negatives too, as we all know. And I think for me, it's when I go on there, I can go down a rabbit hole. I have gone down the rabbit hole. So I make sure that if I'm posting something, I post it and I give myself a little time to respond to comments and questions, but I only give myself so much time. And if I don't answer all of them in that period of time, I have to sort of be okay with that. And sometimes I am, and sometimes I'm not. I feel like I fail at business a lot because my inbox is a freaking swamp and I have really bad correspondence. And I look at some people that are just on it, and I'm not that person. And I just have to sort of be okay with it, you know, and do what I can within my limitations and take the good and the bad and just sort of try not to take it too seriously. Again, works about 75% of the time.
There's a really good book I recently read called Digital Minimalism, and it's by this guy named Cal Newport, who wrote a book called Deep Work that was also really, really good. But it's the best book I've found on trying to manage all these different electronic inputs that are being piped into our brains. And so I'll put a link to that because it's not, great. A lot of these books are like, just quit all social media, or that quit social media is awful. And that's just not, first of all, there's like, I agree with you. There's a lot of good that comes from it, but you got to figure out, there's got to be a system in place to manage it, or it'll easily take over. And it's extremely addictive. I mean, it's like a drug.
Absolutely. I know. It's shocking. Indy doesn't get, she doesn't get screen time, but she can operate an iPhone. I mean, it's crazy to see. It's just very accessible to all of us. And I think, you just have to, you have to be really aware of how much time you're spending on there. I think it's I have an app on my phone that will tell me like, okay, you've spent 15 minutes. Now you're done, and
what is that app?
I find it, what's that?
What is the app called?
It's just screen time. You just set up your, personal, basically limitations.
Oh,
and
cool.
You get up, notification like, okay, you've been on 15 minutes or whatnot, which is what I do. I allow myself like 15 minutes. And then I try to turn, my phone is always on silent, always. Nice. And I find that that allows me to be less distracted, and less aware of what's going on. I find that to be pretty helpful.
That's good advice. And I think I've seen that on my phone, but never messed with it. I'm going to try that this weekend. Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice. I think there's also just this expectation that we all need to get back to each other right away. And I don't think it's realistic,
No, it's definitely, it's not if you're doing anything. I mean, if you have anything going on, you can't just be, reacting to every single one of these messages that come in. Cause I mean, I just feel overwhelmed with it all day. And so I can't imagine how you feel with that. I mean, it's crazy.
I'm just really bad at it, to be honest with you. I'm just really bad, and I check out. That's what I do.
Well, that's a blessing.
I completely turtle shell is what I'm not sure that I recommend it. I don't know that it's even healthy. I'm like, well, I'm overwhelmed now. Shutting her
down. So one more big question about creativity. So knowing everything and all your experience doing this for so many years and doing it part-time and then making the transition to full-time, and I bet you get this question a lot, but for somebody who wants to be a professional creative, whether that's photography, writing, jewelry making, do you have any standard advice that you give to folks when they ask you for that?
Yeah, I do. And it's actually advice that my friend Matt gave to me, which is, and I might be, again, being a little cliche here, but it's sort of really identifying your own voice and allowing yourself to be true to that and stick to that. I think, again, social media, it's easy to sort of be really inspired by someone and to sort of allow that inspiration to maybe influence your own work. And I think on some level, we're all inspired by mountains. We all love, the rivers and lakes and Montana. And there's a lot of people inspired by the same things that I'm inspired by, but sort of trying to make it, the work that you produce, be true to your own voice. I think that's the most important thing. I think that's all we really have. There's a million people creating a million different beautiful things, and the only thing we really have to offer is our own voice, and so I don't know that there's a clear-cut way to find that, but I think sort of really being honest with yourself and sort of identifying the things that inspire you and are important to you, and really allowing those to direct the work that you do.
I think that's great advice. That's awesome advice. A lot easier said than done. I mean, I think you're finding your voice is the result of 15 years of working your ass off. And so I think
that's part of it, is putting in the work, I think in a social media world, it's like, oh, there's this expectation that you can just kind of, maybe skip some steps, but I think I really do believe in putting in the work. I really do.
Yeah, well, that shows. It shows in your artistic endeavors, but then with everything you have going on, I mean, just simply building a house with your own hands, you're not afraid of hard work. I think we can all agree on that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
It's super important. So I've got some quick questions that I'd like to ask everybody. Your answers can be as long as you want, but the questions are pretty quick. Can we just run through those and then I'll let you get back to everything you got going on?
Absolutely.
Do you have any favorite books about the American West?
I am really bad at favorites, terribly bad. And I actually dreaded this question because I was like, I'm just really bad at narrowing it down. I can think of a book that really impacted me.
Yeah.
And which was Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee.
Yep.
That's sort of, I would say, what sort of started maybe me down that genre. I think that was a really profound book and a really, just really well done. I think that was one of my favorites, but also it's also a lot of the books I don't know lately I've been reading have also been really hard and very sad. And I actually love fiction, but I've been reading a lot of nonfiction. But I think that as far as of the West, I think that's the one that comes to mind. But I've actually been really meaning to kind of be a part of your little book club, because there seems like a lot of really good content on that and a lot of authors that I haven't heard of. And there's a million books I want to read at all times, So,
I definitely know. It's out of control for me.
It's out of control.
Yeah. And now these publishers have started sending me free books. And so it's like, awesome. It's like winning the lottery, except it just like creates this level of franticness that I need to be reading all these damn books.
Only so much time in the day.
Yeah, exactly. And what's your favorite book of all time, if you can pick one, or you can just rattle off some of your favorites? It doesn't have to be the West.
Gosh, I actually, I can't say that I have even a favorite that comes to mind. I've read so many books, and I can only think of things recently that I've read that have really, because of reading The Obstacle is the Way, I actually went in and read the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And I thought that, I think that was obviously, it's just a really profound book. I think The Obstacle is the Way wraps it up really nicely, but I still really enjoyed reading the original. And then I just got done with Sapiens.
Oh, man, that is so good.
It's so good. I thought it was actually a bit depressing, too.
I've heard people say that before, and I can see that.
And just sort of, on the extinction of animals and whatnot, like that stuff really hits me hard. But I also found it to be, I just thought it was very well done. And I thought it was excellent. And so I just started The Daily Stoic. I'm really on a stoicism kick. I've
got that in my office. I read that every day when I get to work because it's so valuable.
It is. It's so valuable, and it's actually, I kind of probably forgot to mention that, but that's kind of become a little part of my ritual, is fitting that into the day.
Yeah, I can't recommend that enough. And I think you're the first person who's mentioned Daily Stoic, and I should have thought of that before, because I have that on my desk at work, and I read it, and it's so cool to see that these people that lived 2,000 years ago were dealing with the same exact problems that we're dealing with now, Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing book.
You probably don't watch many films with everything you have going on, but in your life, have there been any documentaries or films that have been meaningful to you that you would recommend other people watch?
I haven't watched a film. I'm really quite honest here. In 2 years.
That's awesome.
And I've never had a TV. So
good for you.
Well, it's honestly, it wasn't even really a choice. It's just like life is busy, and it's not that I don't enjoy occasional, Netflix on my iPhone occasionally, but sure. I don't really have. I kind of love the Montana, I'm going to sound really cliche here, but I loved A River Runs Through It, even though it sort of brought a lot of fishing tourism to Montana. I loved that I love that film, and I'm really antiquated as far as anything new. For a long time, I honestly kind of steered away just because of the line of work I was in. I steered away from anything that was really heavy and kind of watched fluff for a little while because I really had a hard time handling anything with like any sort of violence or since enough time and space away from that, I feel recovered. But for a while, I really didn't even have anything substantial to add to that list. So I'm not quite the best person to do the favorite films, and I apologize for my boring answer.
I like that answer a lot, actually. I mean, I think I've ever since my girls have been born, it's rare that I watch a movie. They were out of town recently, and I watched The Dawn Wall, which is about Tommy Caldwell climbing El Capitan.
Oh yeah,
and that was
love to see that.
It was really, really good. And I think just the fact that I actually watched a full movie all the way through was just super cool. And
totally, really luxurious.
Yes, I was being such a slob, just chilling, watching movies. No, I think that's a great answer. So you've got all this different stuff going on, your work and your hobbies. Is there a certain activity that is funny or that people would be surprised that you do, a hobby or just some activity that's either weird or funny that you do on a regular basis?
I think there's a couple things, I guess. I have my skydiving pilot's license.
What? Really?
I actually I haven't jumped in a long time, but I used to jump out of planes, and that was for a period of my life. And I do love a dirt bike, and I'm a total history nerd. Love history. So those are kind of maybe things people wouldn't guess on the surface.
I would not have guessed. I mean, they make sense now, but I just would have never pulled skydiving out. I've never done it before. I need to do that.
It is, I loved it. Actually did really, really love it. It's it's a bit of a different culture than I've ever been a part of before, but it was a fun period of my life. And I definitely have a fear of heights. And so it was a definite, it pushed me, in a lot of different ways. And I met a lot of really interesting, really kooky people. And, it actually kind of surprised me. It kind of fell into my lap, and I, got the opportunity and got into it for a while.
Very cool. Yeah. If you had to pick one place, and this is a hard question, but if you had to pick one place that you would say is your favorite location in the West, where would that be?
One, really. Sheesh, that's tough.
This whole series of questions, I realize now that you don't like favorites. It's kind of...
Yeah. What comes to mind, I would say... I'm not going to pick one. I would say what comes to mind, I've had a lot of incredible experiences in the Bob Marshall. Mm-hmm. Who doesn't love the Bob, right?
Yep.
The Bitterroots, because they're my daily go-to. And I really love the Sawtooth and the Frank Church and the Middle Fork of the Salmon. And that area really, really speaks to me. So how about 4?
That works, and I agree with all those. I think that's a good list. I've never been to the Frank Church, and I've never been in the Bob, which is unacceptable. Really?
Yeah, I think you, of all people, I think you would absolutely love it. It's really, it's steeped in history, and it's also it's really expansive. It's a really, really pretty dynamic area. I think you'd love it. I really do.
Yeah, I know. I've driven through there going 80 miles an hour, but never gotten back in there. I'll do it eventually. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I think it was actually funny timing because I was talking to my friend Matt, who I mentioned before, and I'm just getting ready to embark on a different phase of jewelry making where I've purchased this equipment to be able to do like large scale meltdowns and to be able to really repurpose a lot of metal. And I've been a little resistant to it because there's a part of me I recognize that's fearful that if I've not been able to make more and people have been buying it, and that's wonderful. And there's a part of me that's if I'm quite honest, that's scared that if more is available, that maybe people won't buy it or like it anymore. Yep. I don't know. Yep. And, he said to me, he was like, you got to let that be your guide, and he said this to me before, and it's something that comes up again. And it's sort of like, are you fearful? Are you freaked out? Well, explore that, look at that, and let that sort of guide the decisions you make. Is it because, is it steeped in reality, or is it steeped in your own insecurity? Mm-hmm. And sort of just, being honest with yourself and allowing that to sort of, make your decisions. I think that's a really solid advice in a lot of different areas of life.
I agree. That can be universally applied to whatever. I think that's very wise. And so next to the last question, if you could make a request of the people that listen to this podcast, and they're people that love the American West in one way or the other, knowing everything you know about the landscape of the West and creativity and pursuing your passion and taking risks, does some words of wisdom or something you would like to ask of the people that listen to this? Does anything come to mind?
I think one of the things I struggle with most about sort of just being an artist is my lack of, sometimes I want to do more. I'd like the business to develop into something that does a little bit more, that gives back a little bit more. And so I've had to really look at my personal choices and like the effect that I have as an individual and having a child on the land, on, plastic, on, being a good steward. And so right now for me, I think it's sort of taking care of my own corner of the world and doing the best I can, whether that's, being aware of what you consume, being aware of the places that you're buying from, voting with your dollar, and just sort of just doing the best you can with what you've got. And and just sort of trying to take care of your corner of the world. And for me right now, I think that's where I'm striving to make a difference and make changes in my life. And I guess I hope that everybody sort of does that, I
do know. I love that. I think that is great. So how can people connect with you online, on social media? Where should they go?
RubyandRevolver.com is probably the best way. That goes straight to my swamp of an inbox, and eventually I will get to it.
Well, thank you. This was really, really, really fun. I love this. I feel like we could have talked for like 5 more hours, but I'll be respectful and we can finish up. But I really appreciate it. This was great.
Thank you, Ed. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thanks for taking the time.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.